Hello students. So students, we have come to the last part of your biology practicals, and in this particular session we are going to do the demonstrative experiment. Now this demonstrative experiment, it is also known as spottings. So in this experiment there are going to be 10 specimens from specimen A to specimen J, and you have to identify each of the specimen and then you have to write description about that specimen. So let us start with the specimen of spot A. Now in spot A or specimen A, there are two specimens. The first one is wind pollination in maize and the second one is insect pollination in salvia. So both these specimens are kept in spot A. So let us first study about wind pollination in maize and then we'll go to the next one. Now in maize, the pollination is brought about by wind. And we have studied this in theory that when the pollination is brought about by wind, this type of pollination is known as anemophily. So it is anemophilous pollination that is taking place in maize. Now over here, the flowers are unisexual and the plants are monoecious. Okay, so the flower will be unisexual, that means it will bear only either the male reproductive organ or it will bear the female reproductive organ. And the plant is monoecious, that means the plant will have both. It will have male as well as female reproductive parts. Now over here in this picture you can see that the male inflorescence is terminal. You can see this is the male inflorescence that is on the terminal end, whereas the female inflorescence is axillary. So here this is the female inflorescence which is axillary. Now for wind pollination, this particular plant that is maize, it has some adaptation. It has undergone some adaptation. So let us study about the adaptations. The first one is the flowers are small, it is inconspicuous and it is not showing. Okay, so there are small flowers, it is not very attractive, or if it is not seen, it is not visible and it is not showing. The flowers are again colorless, it is odorless and it is nectarless. Okay, then the flowers produced above the foliage are placed in hanging position. So the flowers which are produced, they are in hanging position so that the pollen grains can disperse easily by the wind. Then there are large number of pollen grains produced, again because it is anemophilous, it is wind pollination. A large number of pollen grains are produced because a large number of pollen grains can be wasted through this pollination process. Okay, so the plants, they adapt to this condition in a way that they produce large number of pollen grains. Now both the stigma and the anthers are exerted over here and the perianth is reduced into two lodicules. So if you can see over here, these are the two lodicules. The anther is versatile, so this anther, it is versatile. Pollens that are dispersed are light in weight because it has to pollinate through wind pollination. Okay, so it has to disperse through wind, and for that the pollen grains are light in weight and they are large in number. If we speak about stigma, the stigma is hairy, it is feathery and it is branched so that it can easily catch the pollen grains that are dispersed in the wind. Okay, so this is wind pollination in maize. So if in specimen A, this particular picture will be kept, you have to write about the wind pollination of maize. And if this picture is kept, you have to write about insect pollination in salvia. So let us see what is insect pollination in salvia. Now the salvia flower, this is a typical entomophilous flower. What do you mean by entomophilous flower? The flowers that get pollinated by insects are known as entomophilous flowers. And the pollination is brought about by honeybee. Okay, so in salvia, the insect that pollinates the flower is honeybee. Now again, this flower has adapted some conditions. Let us see what are the conditions. The first thing is that the flower is bright and attractive. Only when the flower is bright and attractive, it will attract the insects to take the nectar, and then these insects will come and take the pollen grains along with them. The salvia flower has bilobed corolla with two stamens attached to the corolla. So this is the salvia flower. In this here you can see a clear picture. So if you can see, this is a bilobed corolla and there are two stamens attached to the corolla. So over here if you can see, this is one stamen and this is one stamen. So there are two stamens that are attached to the corolla. Of the stamen, each of the two anthers has only one fertile lobe. So this you can see here in the diagram. If you see over here, this is the fertile lobe and this is the sterile lobe. So one of the lobe of the anther is fertile and the other one is sterile. Now the sterile half, it forms the plate which is placed above the lower lip. So this is the lower lip, okay, and there is a plate of sterile lobe which is placed over here, okay, and the fertile one is in the hood of the upper lip, okay. Now when the honeybee, it lands on the flower, or you can see when the honeybee lands on the lower lip of the corolla of this flower, this sterile plate which is present over here at the bottom, this is pushed, and as this is pushed, the fertile plate which is here at the top, you can see this is the fertile one. So this is the fertile anther. This is when the sterile plate is pushed, the fertile plate will bend down, it will come down and it will shed the pollen grains on the body of this honeybee. Okay. Now when the same honeybee goes to the other salvia flower, it will dust that particular pollen that it is holding to the stigma of the other flower. And this is how the pollination, the insect pollination in salvia takes place. Okay. Now once this salvia flower has dispersed its pollens, the stigma hangs down. Okay, so as you can see, if this salvia flower has dispersed its pollen, this stigma will hang down. And as the stigma hangs down, and if this particular bee will come and land on the other flower, it will dust the pollen grains on the stigma of the other flower. Okay, so this is the insect pollination in salvia. Next, specimen B or spot B. Again, the spot B is having two specimens. Now, this is about the meiosis in onion bud cell, okay, or the plant cell. So, the two specimens that can be kept in spot B is either the stages of meiosis 1 or it will be the stages of meiosis 2. So, first, let us study all the stages of meiosis 1. Now, students, as you all know that meiosis, it is a reductional cell division that divides a diploid cell into 4 haploid daughter cells. Okay, and this process of meiosis, it occurs in germinal or the reproductive cell to produce the gametes. Now it involves two division. It involves meiosis 1 and then followed by meiosis 2. Meiosis 1 that we are going to study right now, it results in the reduction of the chromosome number. Whereas meiosis 2, it maintains the chromosome number but is necessary to reduce the amount of DNA that was doubled during the DNA replication. Okay, so let us study the stages of meiosis 1 first and then we'll go to the stages of meiosis 2. So meiosis 1, it has 4 stages: prophase, metaphase, anaphase and telophase. And prophase, that is prophase 1, it is further divided into 5 sub-stages. Okay, so this is early prophase, this is late prophase. In between the early and the late prophase, there are 5 sub-stages. So let us study about the stages of prophase 1. The first one is liptotine phase. In liptotine phase, the chromosomes that are seen, it appears beaded. Okay, so there are beaded chromosomes that appear. The nuclear membrane and the nucleolus, it is very distinct. The next stage is zygotine stage. Here, the homologous chromosomes are seen bivalent. So if you can see, the homologous chromosomes are bivalent over here. Okay, so the pairing takes place in the zygotine stage that forms this bivalent structure, and this pairing is known as synapsis. Okay, after synapsis, the next stage that comes up is Pachytene stage. In Pachytene, the two chromatids of each chromosomes, they become visible so that the bivalent appears as tetrads. Okay, so these are the two chromatids of each chromosomes. They become visible and then they appear like a tetrad. So there are four chromatids that are appearing in each chromosome. This gives rise to the next phase that is diplotin phase. And in diplotin phase, the homologous chromosomes, they depart and they are held only by chiasmata. Now what is chiasmata formation? If you see over here, there is a crossing over taking place. Okay, so what is happening? The non-sister chromatids of these two homologous chromosomes, they are exchanging their segments. And this is what happens in diplotin. Crossing over takes place. And then this gives rise to the next phase, that is dikinesis, where nucleolus and the nuclear membrane, it starts disappearing and the spindles become to appear. Dikinesis gives rise to the next phase of meiosis 1, that is metaphase 1. So prophase 1 is over here. Okay, so early prophase 1 and late prophase 1 is over, and then the next phase that takes place is metaphase 1. In metaphase 1, you will see that the bivalents, they get arranged along the equatorial plane. Okay, so they get arranged at the equatorial plane of these spindle fibers. The next phase is anaphase 1, where the homologous chromosomes, they separate and move to opposite poles. So the homologous chromosomes are moving to two opposite poles, and each of the pole is having half of the original number of the chromosomes and each with two chromatids. And then comes the last phase, that is telophase 1. In telophase 1, the chromosomes relax. So if you see over here, the two poles, the chromosomes relax. The nuclear membrane and the nucleolus, it starts reappearing. Okay, so over here meiosis 1 ends and this gives rise to the next meiosis, that is meiosis 2. In the first stage of meiosis 2, that is prophase 2, the chromosomes are condensed, the nucleolus and the nuclear membrane starts disappearing. So here if you see, the chromosomes are condensed and slowly in the next phase, the nucleolus and the nuclear membrane, it starts disappearing. In metaphase 2, the chromosomes are seen arranged again at the equatorial plane of the cell and the two spindle fibers are, arranged at the right angle. In anaphase 2, the sister chromatids of each of the chromosomes, they separate and migrate to opposite poles. So if you can see over here, the sister chromatids are migrating, they are separating and migrating to two opposite poles. And then this gives rise to the last phase of meiosis, that is telophase 2, where the chromosomes, they relax, the nuclear membrane and the nucleolus are reconstituted around each of the chromatids and 4 nuclei are seen. Okay, so then this gives rise to the 4 haploid cells. So these are the 4 haploid cells that are formed at the end of the telophase 2 stage. So students, in specimen B or spot B, either the stages of meiosis 1 will be kept, okay, so the pictures of these meiosis 1 will be kept, or the stages of meiosis 2 will be kept, okay, and you have to write about the particular stage. So this was about specimen B. Let us go to specimen C. Specimen C has 2 things. It can be either emasculation or bagging, tagging and labeling. First, let us see what is emasculation. Now this is a process of removal of stamens before the maturity, and this takes place, or this is done deliberately to avoid self-pollination. Okay, so what is done over here? When the flowers get mature, so before maturity, when it is in a bud condition, the stamens of that particular flower is removed. Why is the stamen removed? So that to avoid self-pollination, so that self-pollination doesn't take place. Now when there are large flowers, this is done using a forceps and scissor. And when there are small flowers, you can say the crop plants like sorghum or paddy crops, here the flowers are very small, and so the emasculation process, it is carried out in hot water or cold water, or it is also carried out in alcohol for 1 to 10 minutes. Okay, so this is the process of emasculation, where the stamens are deliberately removed before the maturity of the flower to avoid self-pollination. The next one, the next specimen for spot C is bagging, tagging and labeling. Now once the emasculation process is done, the flower is covered with a small bag. So if you can see over here, this flower is covered with a small bag. And this covering is to prevent pollination of undesired pollen grains. Okay, so to prevent the pollination of undesired pollen grains, this flower is covered. Now the bag that is used to cover this flower, it can be a polythene bag, it can be a paper bag, or it can be a bag which is made up of muslin cloth. Okay, and these bags are perforated. Why are they perforated? It is perforated so that proper aeration is provided to this particular flower. And then a label is put on this plant, okay, and that label will display the date of emasculation process, then other details like crossing and information about the parents of the particular plant. Okay, so these are the two specimens that can be kept in spot C: emasculation, where this picture will be kept, or bagging, tagging and labeling, where this particular picture will be kept. Now let us move to the next specimen, spot D. Now spot D has a number of specimens, and these specimens are broadly divided into two groups of plants. So it can be either xerophytic plants or it can be aquatic plants. Further, there are 3 of these xerophytic plants, and then we'll go to the aquatic plants. The first xerophytic plant is Apuntia dileme, which is commonly known as nakfani. Now this is a succulent plant, or this is very commonly, you must be knowing this very commonly as cactus plant. Okay, so it is a succulent plant and it is drought resistant xerophyte. Now what are xerophytes? Xerophytes are the plants that grow in wild arid areas, in desert areas where there is no water. So the plants that grow in such drought condition where there is no water, such plants are known as xerophytic plants. So Apuntia dileme is one of the xerophytic plants. Now over here, the leaves of the plant are modified into spines. So if you see these spines, these are leaves that are being modified into spines. Why are the leaves modified into spines? They are modified into spines so that they can reduce transpiration. Anyways, there is no water in the area. They have to, reduce transpiration. They have to retain their water, and so the leaves are reduced into spines. Now, the stem, it becomes green, it becomes flat, and it does the process of photosynthesis. Now, if you see the leaves, they are modified into spines. Okay, usually in usual plants, the photosynthesis process is done mainly by the leaves of the plant. Over here, if there are no leaves, there are spines, then the photosynthesis process is done by the stem of the plant. So this green structure that you see, which is known as phylloclade, this is nothing but the stem of the plant, which has become flat, it has become green, and this does the process of photosynthesis. The phylloclades, each of the phylloclades will have many nodes. These nodes are known as areoles. So these are small areoles on each of the phylloclade, and the areoles will have either one or more than one spines. So the spines on the phylloclade are representing the leaves. Now other than this, there are also small bristles which are present on the stem of the plant. Now these bristles are present to avoid grazing of animals. What are bristles? Bristles are nothing but more sturdier spine-like structures. Okay, and this is present on the plant so that the animals, the wild or the domestic animals, do not come and graze upon this plant. Okay, so there are bristles present. Now the stem is fleshy due to the presence of mucilage, and this mucilage in the stem is present to retain water. So because the plant is growing in the xerophytic condition, into a condition where there is no water, it is a drought resistant plant, so the mucilage in the stem will retain water, and this stored water, it is used during unfavorable condition. So during summer, when there is no scope of any water coming from any side, the stored water into these stems or in the mucilage is used up by the plants to survive. So this is the first xerophytic plant. The next one is Calotropis procera. So Calotropis procera, this is a non-succulent plant. This you must have commonly seen growing as a weed here and there. And this is a non-succulent xerophytic plant, and it is called as a drought enduring desert shrub. What do you mean by drought enduring plant? Now drought enduring plants, they have extensive root system which enables them to maintain growth even at the time of extreme drought condition. So that is how the other name for Calotropis procera, it is known as a drought enduring desert shrub. The leaves, as you can see, they are thick and it is leathery. And the leaves and the young branches, it is covered by mealy coating. What is mealy coating? It is covered by waxy coating, and it also has tiny hair. It is covered by tiny hair, the leaf and the branches. And this hair and the mealy coating or the waxy coating, it acts as an insulating covering. Okay, so it insulates the plant. And the plant will also contain latex. So if you cut any part of this plant, if you cut the leaf or the stem of this plant, there will be this white milky liquidy substance that will be oozing out. This white substance is known as latex. Okay, and that is how the common name of this plant is Indian milky weed. Okay, so this is Calotropis procera, which is the second xerophytic plant. Then the third one is Acacia arabica. Again, this is a non-succulent xerophyte, and the leaves, if you see, it is bipinnately compound. So the leaf, this is one leaf which is bipinnately compound, and these bipinnately compound leaves are having many leaflets. Now if you see, the leaflets are small in size. Why are the leaflets small in size? They are small so that they can reduce the rate of transpiration. Okay, so that is the result. There are many leaflets, but the leaflets are small in size. And the stipules of the plant is modified into spines. So these are nothing but the stipules of the plant which is modified into a spiny structure. For the same reason, to prevent grazing from animals. Okay, now when the part of the plant, when the stem of the plant, it turns old. So the older part of the plant, it is covered by a thick brown bark. Okay, so this is the third plant in xerophytic group. So in xerophytic plant, there are three: Apuntia dilini, Calotropis procera, and Acacia arabica. So students, if you notice over here, I have typed the name of the plant, the botanical name of the plant, in italics. Why have I done this? Because this is by rule. If you write any botanical name or any scientific name of any organism, you have to, when you're typing it, you have to write it in italics. And when you're writing it, when you're handwriting it, you have to underline the genus and the species separately. Okay, so these are the xerophytic plants in spot D. The other specimens that can be kept in spot D are aquatic plants. So there are about 3 of these aquatic plants. The first one is Hydrilla. So Hydrilla is a submerged rooted hydrophyte. When we say it is submerged rooted hydrophyte, that means it grows entirely under the water. and it is mainly found in freshwater ponds. Okay. Now, the substratum to which this plant is attached, the roots of the plant, is made up of poorly developed adventitious root. When we say that it is poorly developed and adventitious root, that means it is not upholding the substratum very nicely and very firmly. It is a very delicate structure. The stem of the plant, it is soft and slender, and it is having thin membranous leaf which is arranged in a whorl of 3 to 8. So this is one leaf which is arranged in a whorl of 3 to 8. The leaves are without cuticle and stomata. Now the mechanical tissues like collenchyma or sclerenchyma are completely absent in this plant, and so this plant is considered to be very delicate because there is no mechanical tissue present. Whereas the conducting tissue, that is the vascular tissue like xylem and the phloem, even the vascular tissue or the conducting tissue are very poorly developed. But the stem of this plant, it possesses erenchyma cells or the erenchyma tissue and the lacuna. This erenchyma and the lacuna, it provides buoyancy to the plant and it helps the plant to exchange gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen. And the whole plant, it is covered by mucilage. Now the mucilage will protect the plant against the rotting effect of the water. So as I have said earlier that it is a completely submerged plant, that means it is completely growing under the water. So it has to be protected, okay? Because if something is too much into the water for a longer period of time, it will eventually rot. That is the nature of the water. So to prevent the rotting, the plant is completely covered with mucilage. The next one is Eichhornia, which is also known as water hyacinth or jalkumbhi. So this is a free floating hydrophyte that grows in freshwater bodies. So students, you must have seen this, you must have observed this particular plant growing on the surface of the rivers and the ponds. Okay, it is very commonly seen. So this is Eichhornia, known as water hyacinth, and the other common name for it is jalkumbhi. The stem of this plant is offset and grows horizontally below the water surface. Okay, so it does not grow vertically, it grows horizontally but below the surface of the water. And it is spongy due to the air spaces present. The leaves are produced at the node in clusters. So if you see, these are the leaves which are produced in clusters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 leaves produced at one node. So this is a cluster of leaves. And the petiole are swollen due to air chambers. So if you see, this is the petiole. This is the leaf, and below the leaf there is this petiole. The petiole are swollen because there is air chamber present. The lamina has waterproof coating of cuticle. So the lamina of the leaf, this is having a layer of cuticle which is waxy layer that is waterproof, and it prevents water on the leaf. Then the roots are adventitious roots that are again produced at the cluster. So if you see over here, this is one node. On the upper end, the leaves are produced in cluster, and submerged there are roots, adventitious roots, which are produced in clusters. And these adventitious roots, they act as balancer. So they actually balance the plant. And these plants, Eichhornia, they have root pockets. Okay, and the root hair is completely absent. So this is the second aquatic plant after Hydrilla. Next, the third one is Typha. Typha, which is also commonly known as cattail. Typha is an anchored hydrophyte that grows in the shallow hydrophyte. So this is a shallow hydrophyte. It grows in shallow water and marshy places. Okay. The plant has a rhizomatous stem. So the stem is rhizomatous, and there is adventitious root which is present, and the leaves are emerged. If you see the leaves of this plant, they are large, linear, they are soft and thick, and they are sub-cylindrical, but they have a spongy texture. Okay, so you will notice that all the hydrophytic plants are having this spongy erenchymatous structure. They are having this air chamber, modified structure of air chamber, so that they can easily float on water. So the large leaves, the leaves that have turned large, they are able to stand erect because there is presence of mechanical tissue. In hydrilla, there were no mechanical tissue because it was completely submerged. Here, this is floating, or you can say this is growing in shallow water and marshy places. So the leaves are having mechanical tissue which help them to stand erect. The leaves also possesses cuticles. Again, cuticles, they provide this waxy coating so that they can prevent rotting of the leaves. The wax will act as a waterproofing agent. Okay, so the cuticles are having this waxy, the leaves are having the cuticles, which is the waxy coating, and the stomata is present on the emergent position. So this is about the 3 aquatic plants which come under spot D. So students, in today's session we have done spot A, spot B, spot C and spot D. In the next session we will be doing the remaining specimens.